All right. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting for Tuesday, March 24th. Just as a reminder, the meetings of the Mechanicsburg Area School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with the recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board's YouTube channel. With that, we're moving to the first item, item 2.01, the Capital Area Intermediate Unit Operating Budget for 2026-2027.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Attached is the entire budget document for the board's review and consideration. As much as I enjoy a good budget document, I'll refer you to maybe the last page of it, which provides a very high-level summary of all of the individual district contributions to the general operating budget for 25-26, but also the contribution for 26-27. And I know Mr. Bradley has shared both this year and in prior years, the IU has endeavored to try to hold those contributions steady, and so you'll see in columns 7, 8, and 9 the contribution from 25-26, what next year's contribution would be, and then you can see that column 9 ultimately is all zeros, as there's no proposed increase from one year to the next. Mr. Bradley's also done a nice job, I think, of articulating that the IU does manage a variety of other budgets, a number of other budgets, and they're all like business type, enterprise type endeavors. They might have grants, they might have information technology endeavors, but they charge those separately, and all of that is handled through charges for services or grants. Really, from a school district perspective, the only budget we approve as being participant in the IU is their operating budget, which is listed here for the board to consider.
Any questions? If none, what we'll do is move this forward for formal approval. This is the one budget, as Mr. Longwell had said, this is the one budget from the intermediate unit that we do have to approve. The others are approved by the board members representing all the area school districts. They approve those budgets. But this is the only one that every school district has to approve separately. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 2.02, the Mechanicsburg Middle School track refurbishment. Sorry.
Yes. We are thrilled to be able to have Boyd Federhoff with us here tonight. You all know Mr. Hoffman. He likes to steal the limelight, of course, but
Yeah.
no, and that laughter's right. He does not like. But he has two amazing assistants that work with him to help lead our facilities department. One is Dirk Wiley, who has been here a couple times, and Boyd Federhoff is another veteran of the district who has long been a really important part of our facilities department in a lot of ways, and so proud of the way that over the last probably decade he has gone from being a reliable, consistent employee to now a reliable and consistent leader in the department. And we're thrilled that in Mr. Hoffman's absence tonight, he's at a conference, that Mr. Federhoff is able to be here to talk with us about 3 of the bid results. So we'll read each one separately but we'll kind of touch base on each one of these. So I'll maybe intro it and then let Mr. Federhoff talk a little bit more about the specific results. So the MMS track refurbishment, this goes along with that line of approvals that we discussed for the MMS track. We talked about approving the activity to be added, which you've done already. Next is the refurbishment that's needed at the MMS track site. And then obviously the coaches would be an approval that comes through with the budget process. So this is to rehab, not for an all-weather track, but to get it back into a good enough semblance to be able to have regular activity. So I'll turn it over to Boyd.
So you can see the low bid there was Mackmore Construction. This is a contractor we've worked with in the past. We have a good working relationship with them. I don't anticipate any problems if this is approved. This should be a quick and easy project.
Now, this is the track behind Upper Allen.
Correct. The walking track that's there currently, it needs to be widened.
Okay.
It needs to almost double in size.
Double in size.
Yeah, it's only about 7 feet wide at its widest.
From what it's current.
It needs to go to a 14.
Right. Okay.
It has snuck in over the years.
Any questions, Mr. Fedorov, on the track refurbishment?
These estimates are
I know
really
they're-
hard, but I was relieved to hear you had worked with Mackmore before.
Yes, many
tonight.
All right, we will also move, then we'll also move that forward to next board meeting for a vote. 2.03 is the Broad Street Kitchen Sewer Line Project.
So last year, we did replace the main sewer line through Broad Street, sort of an emergency procedure. And this is the main sewer line that picks up everything in the kitchen and will tie into that line. The low bidder on this is Detralia Excavating, who actually did the main line in the building last summer.
They were the ones that came in and did the emergency one
Yes.
for us.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions on the sewer line project?
I assume that'll be done this summer before the
Yes.
kids come back?
Yes.
And does that come out of what pot does that come out of?
Yeah, capital reserve fund.
And the last one too?
Yes, and so we would have probably have liked to do it all at once last summer, but it was just too risky with the start of school coming, and we really just tried to say, well, let's get the main sewer line done, and then we'll get the kitchen this summer. And so to your question, that's our plan, is to capture it during the summer. Because it is a project that's right in close proximity to the multipurpose room, we'll likely be shifting some programming from Broad Street to other elementaries, but we've already had those conversations.
And the track will be done this summer also?
Yes, is our plan.
And Barry Ised's going to be doing the flooring?
Barry Isid is the engineering firm we
Oh,
use.
okay.
So I'm glad you asked that. It's a good question. And so when we look at the core of the project, we bid that, but sometimes there's other professional services depending on how large the project is. And so Barry Ised in this case is our engineer. And so there's some engineering services because of how large the project is that we've had to use for kind of the specialized design and specifications and, some of the mapping out of the sewer lines. And so those are the additional fees that they've assessed to help get the project shovel ready, I'll say. Ultimately then, the core project is done by Detraglia, and then Barry Ised has helped facilitate all along the process. And they'll provide us some additional services even during the project as it's ongoing to make sure things are progressing the way they should, coming alongside Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Fedorov. But that's the package price, if you will, at $149,900.
Is there a separate RFP for the engineering piece, or?
That's a good question. So for construction and certain other things like supplies and equipment, we live in an environment where you either have to procure things through quotes, which you saw on the previous agenda item, through bids, or you can use state contracting, which are pre-bid type mechanisms. There is an exception to all of those rules though, and that is professional services. And so we're not required to bid a professional service as just a matter of best practice. We've often evaluated them from time to time. So who our architect is, who our engineer is, who our solicitor is, who our I said auditor. All of those are ultimately professional services, and we've appointed them with the board at one point or another. We don't necessarily appoint them for every project that they work on. We just look at it periodically to benchmark to make sure we're happy with their services, that we're still getting good value. And then sometimes we will talk to the board about doing an RFP for certain of those services, but it's more periodic than it is on a project by project basis, I would say. But it's a good question.
Any other questions on the sewer line project? If there are no objections, then we'll move that forward to next meeting for a formal vote. And we'll move on to 2.04, the bid results for the Upper Allen RTU replacement. Mr. Federer.
So this is the replacement of 3 existing rooftop units and disposal of them as well. You can see the bidding came in very close with Mid-State Mechanical and Electrical being the low bid. And we also have Siemens listed in the final total projected price. They do our controls, the automation of the units, that's what that is. And again, Barry Ised for the engineer
And Mid-State also is one that we worked with on
in the past.
maybe all of the,
Most
just
of
about
them,
all
yeah.
the projects we've done in the last decades.
Yeah, local.
Yeah,
a question of regional maybe? I'm not sure if they're in Harrisburg, but they do seem to bid on a lot of school projects, and as Dr. Pitts said, a lot of the projects that you've awarded have been gold phones.
I'm just thinking, wow,
What's that?
I'm just thinking, wow.
Yeah, oh, right. Right. It's like Livermore and UCI. They're
That's
kinda
right,
like, you know,
that's right,
Uh,
you give to you,
Mid-state.
you give to us.
Mid-state sounds regional or at least local, so.
Yeah, right.
Good question.
All right.
I'll just expand on one more content there, especially for our new board members. So when we did our construction projects, there was still life in many of the rooftop units on most of the schools. So it might seem strange, well, didn't we just renovate Upper Allen? Why are we doing this? Those units still had life, so we wanted to use those as long as we could. And that was the same on most of the buildings. So now we have a cycle planned out to replace each of the buildings that need that, and we're trying to do one building a summer. Last year, we actually got some assistance from the state through a grant to support the middle school project that we did. And you might remember that you just approved our submission of the north side RTU for next summer. So this one we're doing on our own, the north or the Upper Allen one, and then fingers crossed we'll get some assistance with north side for next year. But this is part of that progression.
So Mid-State's address is Dillsburg.
Close.
Just checking.
Just down the road.
Our mid-state.
Save on the travel expenses.
All right, any other questions or concerns about the RTU replacement? All right, if none, then we'll move that one forward as well for a vote at a subsequent board meeting. Thank you, Mr. Farrow.
Have a good evening.
You as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Nice job.
With that, those are all the items we have for the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. So unless anyone has anything else to bring, we will adjourn that meeting and take just a quick couple of minutes break before we move into, for some of us, meeting number 3. All right, thank you. All right, I'd like to call to order the working session for Tuesday, March 24th. As a reminder, the meetings of the Mechanicsburg Area School District Board of Directors are being recorded and live streamed for the purpose of transparency and increased public access. The live stream, along with recordings from previously held meetings, can be found on the school board's YouTube channel. We'll move into the first item, budget and financing. Item 3.01, the general fund budget expense for 2026-2027.
Okay. So this will be a tag team presentation between Mr. Longwell and I as we talk through different elements of the budget. Obviously, this is kind of the third in a three-part series, if you will. So taking you back 2 meetings ago, we looked at specifically the expenses related to healthcare, because as we were developing the budget and we looked ahead to this presentation for analyzing the expenses and talking about the summary, it was very clear that healthcare was an expense that we had to spend a little bit more time unpacking for you as a board to really be able to bring to life one of the graphs that you'll see as a part of this presentation. So we talked about that 2 meetings ago. Last meeting, we dove into the revenue side. So we looked at local revenue, state revenue, and federal revenue, certainly talked about some of the trends we were seeing there and where we see revenue being for the 26-27 school year. So tonight is the big one where we talk about expenses and then go into the summary. And we're gonna forego any delay to kind of getting to the bottom line, and then we'll go back and go through the details of how we got here. But ultimately, at our last meeting, we shared that projected revenue of about $112 million. The expenditures that we're going to share with you tonight are right around $117.6 million, and that would bring us to a preliminary budget deficit of $5.6 million. Now, that is without any tax increase. So that is the revenue, that revenue line, the $112 million, does not include any tax increase whatsoever. We are recommending to the board to go forward with the index, 4.3%, which includes the 1% tax increase that the board has set aside for construction. If you remember, that's a 1% that has been baked in the last number of years, and this is actually the last official year of having that percentage included. It was 1.5 for a number of years, and then the last few it's been 1%. But then on top of that, obviously, we have additional operations expenditures that we need to be able to cover, and to get us to a place where the operating budgeted deficit is one that we're comfortable with, or most comfortable with. We really need to see the tax increase, unfortunately, go to the max. We will show you some graphs as a part of this where you'll see the historical trends with that tax increase, and you'll see there have been years where we've gone to the max, years where we've been able to stay short of the max, and we'll talk about what all that means as we go through. But this is the bottom line of the story that now we'll spend the next little bit and number of slides unpacking for you. So again, we're going to tag team a little bit, and Mr. Longwell is going to get us started with some of the overall assumptions. Thank you.
As we kind of jump into the presentation here, I just wanted to mention we have at your seats your budget binders, which does provide additional supplementary information beyond just more of some of the summary level conversation we'll have here today. So as you look through your binders, you'll certainly be able to see more detail on revenues, on expenses, and some other benchmarking that we've done as part of the budget process. But as we look at the presentation, we want to start with a summary of our expenses and looking at a pie chart. So when you look at that summary and say, well, what makes up the total for our general fund? Where are our monies going in terms of total expenses? And you can see our personnel is about 67.6%. So that would be salaries and benefits. Our contracted services would include instructional aid support at 18.9%. That slice of the pie is not as easy to explain as, say, personnel, which are very directly salaries and benefits. This slice of the pie, the 18.9%, includes everything from transportation to charter schools to utilities. But really, I would say in that bucket of contracted services, there's a lot of mandated costs. And so they're costs that we don't have a lot of influence over in terms of the increases. Rather, they're mandated or contracted costs that we have to provide as part of operating our school district. Then when you kind of look at the next biggest slice of the pie, I would go to debt service at 8.7%. And so for us, that, you know, from a benchmarking perspective, we'd like to see that at 10% or less in kind of the school district world. In fact, the average in PA schools is probably somewhere in the 7 to 8% anyway. So in terms of benchmarking, I like to look at it as we're around average in terms of the state and spending on our debt service. But we're also kind of below that 10%, which is what we also like to look at, Dr. Fitz and I, when we kind of benchmark things looking at the budget. And then finally, supplies and equipment at 4.8%. I know when we talk about what's discretionary, I don't know that you could even say this is entirely discretionary, because we still need copy paper and we still need pencils and we still need supplies and equipment to operate the schools. So when we talk about, you know, what truly is discretionary in the budget, a lot of things on the expense side of the budget are truly influenced by either contracted or mandates that we talked about at the 18.9% with contracted services, or from a personnel perspective, we have to have our staff to run our schools, and then we've negotiated agreements, or we have compensation agreements in place that kind of dictate what the costs are associated with personnel. So that's a 50,000 foot view of our expenses.
Yeah, you referenced the benchmarking that 10% is the, you know, to keep under that, 7 or 8 might be the average. What in the education industry, what's personnel generally? Is there a
that's a good question.
window that
I would say generally for PA schools, somewhere in the 60 to 70 is what I've seen. The state average might be a little lower than where we're at, but again, that's very highly influenced too by the types of programs you're running or the needs of your school district, because when you compare one district to the next, you might have schools who maybe they don't have an ELD program like we do, or you might, sorry, you're gonna finish. Or you might have, we don't contract any personnel, right? You know, and so our percentage probably does look a little higher because we don't contract out, you know, food services, or, well, that's not in this bucket, but food services or maintenance or anything like that. So comparing from school to school can be different because of either the types of programs we're running or because of the nature of the staff arrangements that we've set up. So
That's exactly what I was going to say.
we're on the same wavelength. So as we kind of look at a little further to say, we've kind of looked at a 50,000 foot view of what makes up our budget in terms of expenses, wanting to talk a little bit about what has changed. So categorically, when you look at the entire adjustment we need to expenses, it's about 8.1 million, 8.2 million. And when you kind of look at those three areas, I would categorize them generally into construction, which is connected to our financing plan, our recurring costs, and then program costs. And so as we unpack that a little further here this evening, I'll go over the construction, talk a little bit about our financing plan and where we've been, and kind of as Dr. Bitt said, we're getting to that finish line where this is the last year of that adjustment. We'll talk a little more about recurring costs and what makes that up. Largely that 5.5 billion is, as you'll see in the coming slides, personnel, it's insurances, it's charter schools, utilities, things of that nature. And then as we kind of tag team the presentation, Dr. Betts will take us on a little further look at the total programming costs and what some of the changes are associated with that. So in terms of construction, the financing plan, this is the last true-up adjustment we have in terms of next year's debt service, and you can see that that adjustment is contained in the budget. We have offset it with 1%. Which is on this next slide. I will mention, I recognize they're a little bit different. We're in the kind of the final year of the increasing debt service versus this was our plan all along, you know, that we established back all the way in, it's funny to say, but 2017-18 was probably the year before that where we were actually talking about how do we create a financing plan to fund all of our construction projects. And as Dr. Bitt shared, you can see that plan started then in 18-19 where we borrowed 1% or 1.5% per year. Ultimately to fund school construction for the purpose of addressing our growing enrollment, for the purpose of addressing our infrastructure needs for things like roofs, HVAC replacements, things of that nature, and then ultimately addressing programmatic needs as well, particularly looking at equity of facilities. So we wanted the same experience for all of our kids, regardless of whether you went to Shepherdstown, Upper Allen, Northside, or Broad Street, Kindergarten Academy. So those were all very important pillars of our construction projects. I would suggest that this is even a little bit of a unfunded mandate to an extent, because while we did get some PlanCon money for some of our projects, not all of our projects received PlanCon funding. And so in the absence of PlanCon funding, you have school construction now falling 100% to the school districts to foot from a local funding perspective. The only exception is in the last couple of years, as Dr. Bush shared in our finance committee meeting, there is some available dollars for a competitive grant process where you can get some money, a little bit of money maybe, to help fund construction projects, but not certainly on the scale that it used to be with PlanCon in terms of looking at maybe a larger project, a more total project. So the financing plan, as we talked about, stepping in that last increase of 1% here in 26-27, and it is the final year of the tax increase associated with our plan. So in terms of recurring costs, we wanted to talk through this a little bit with the board as we look at our 26-27 budget for the general fund. When you look at personnel cost salary increases, that $1,241,000, that is for all of our staff members. And I know Mrs. Stata had shared in an earlier presentation, we're probably about 689 employees. I always round it off to about 700 full-time employees. And then we employ probably another 400 or 500 individuals for everything from extra duty stipends to athletics to school police, teacher leaders, a variety of extra positions that support our programs. But largely the salary increases are related to those full-time employees, almost all of it, at $1,224,000. And then in terms of benefits, that's a fairly large number. It's a larger number that you can see bigger than our salary increases, which I know we talked about a little bit at one of our medical presentations. Of that number, that 3.3 million, about 2.9 or 3 million of it is health insurance alone. And so when you look at that 3.3 million, the vast majority of it is being caused by the budget adjustments being caused by the need to adjust to the medical trends that we're seeing and we're realizing. Tuition reimbursements and something else we'll talk a little bit about on a future slide, but that is we've seen an increase there as well. And we know that we need to adjust our budget to react to those trends in terms of what we're seeing currently. Commercial charter schools is always on our budget presentation. I know Dr. Bitts and I have probably been talking about this, charter schools, for the last 10 or 20 years maybe, because it's always increasing and it's always an influencing factor in our budgets as we construct those. And then utilities. These numbers have really crept up in the last year or two. It probably parallels, frankly, some of the increases we're all seeing personally in our residential utility bills. Electricity has really been increasing at a pretty significant rate. And when we talk to our energy consultants, a lot of that is not just the transmission element, but it's the grid and the infrastructure and the costs that are being passed on to consumers. So we're seeing an increase as well in electricity and adjusting our budget. Largely that 518 is related to electricity costs.
I see here that it's the line of salary increases, but what about actual salary? Like, that's all benefits, not just benefits increasing, right? So
In terms of total salaries, you mean? Yeah, so we do have in the budget binder, and it would be on, it should be in tab 3, that gives you additional detail on what makes up the total salaries of the school district. And so for 26-27, that number, it says 3.2 on the very bottom of the page in the binder. It's about 44,521,000 in terms of total salaries that we're budgeting for 26-27. The increase that we're showing is really related to the year-over-year increase connected to the CBA increases or the increases in our compensation plans. But that's a good question. This is the year-over-year increase versus the total salaries that are.
So this is also reflecting in the second line, benefits increasing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we'll talk about that. That's a good preview. It's in one of the future slides here on medical, and we'll talk a little more about the total dollars being spent in the year versus the annual increases, which I think is kind of the question you were posing.
Just along with
the 230,000 for commercial charter, is that increased enrollment, or is that, I know the state shifted some things as far as charter was, but it really didn't save us much money.
That's right. So I would say year over year, and we have a slide for that too, so that's a good preview. The enrollment has increased at times over the years, but I think we also try to look at that through the lens of our enrollment has increased. And if you hold that percentage steady, like you would expect that there would be some increase in charter school enrollment as well. It also is a function of our tuition reimbursement, the calculation PD 363. And so we have seen increases year over year related to that. To your point, the most recent changes in charter school were a little bit washed out by the loss of the reimbursement. And so we had budgeted around 400,000 for that reimbursement in terms of actual costs. We won't realize any reimbursement for that in 25-26. We did see a kind of an offset in the $350,000, $325,000 range for the tuition change. But now this is looking forward to 26-27 to say, what's our expectation in terms of that? Generally, tuition reimbursements have increased. Tuition reimbursement, the actual fee per student for regular ed and special ed has increased by between 3% and 5% a year because it's based on our own costs. And so when we trend that, we do look at both elements of to say, well, we've got to account for the 3 to 5% increase in tuition rates, which they did change for 25-26, but then we also look at enrollment to say what's happening in terms of that trend. So you're going to say something. Sorry.
I'll just answer it maybe a little bit differently, but I think ultimately saying the same thing. The amount that we pay a cyber charter school for one of our students living here to go there is directly related to the expenditures that we spend on all our students. So as that total goes up for us as a district, therefore that number that we're required to send also goes up. So whereas a few years ago it might have been in the 14,000s, I think now we're approaching 16,000 per student when they choose to go to a commercial cyber. And then if they're in special education, we send double that, about 31,000 to that cyber charter. So.
And that's a really good way to look at it. Said more succinctly, because our budget's increased, the charges, because it's based on budget, which is also another thing we kind of advocate for, is shouldn't it be based on actual expenses and not budgeted expenses, but we could probably talk about that for a while. But yes, it increases generally in that 3 to 5% range because of the annual increases that we see in our budgets.
Thank you.
So I think this, coming back to Mrs. Dang's question about total cost versus kind of the increases, you can see our total medical spend charted out here from 2009-10 to 24-25, 25-26, with our estimate there in 25-26 being a little over 14 million, probably in that 14.3, $14.5 million range is what we're expecting to land 25-26. You know, as we've kind of narrated some of the story around medical and trying to analyze what's happening with our increasing costs, you could see from 2009-10 to probably 21-22, I'll say, while there were some increases and some leveling off and some increases and leveling off, generally depending on whatever years you want to pick to analyze, say a 3-year trend, a 5-year trend, an 8-year trend, the annual average increases was averaging like 8%, 7-8%. And so for a long time, that was our budget strategy, was to say, we know generally, on average, over the course of a number of years, we can budget 7 or 8% per year. And you know, some years it might be a little over, some years it might be a little under, but generally over the course of that, if you draw a trend line through that, the budget was always kind of in pretty close, pretty in line with, you know, where our actuals were. I think then what happened is you look at what happened in 22, 23 and beyond, 23, 24, we saw that line tick up pretty significantly. And so not only did it increase at a faster rate than really any of the years before it, it's done it three consecutive years, I'll say. And so for perspective's sake, the year there in 22-23 was $8.6 million. That's that last little plateau we had. Then it increased to 10.9 million, which was a 27% increase in expenditures. From that 27%, we certainly would have hoped, based on the prior trends, to maybe see a plateau or maybe even a little bit of a decrease, but rather we followed that 27% increase up with an increase to $12.7 million, and that was a 17% increase. So just in those 2 years alone, it went up 27%, and then we followed that up with another 17%. Fast forward to 25, 26, we were hoping we'll have two big increases, right? Maybe the plateaus here on the other side in 25, 26, and we're not seeing that, unfortunately. We're seeing what looks like another 14 or 15% increase in terms of year-over-year medical spend, which would ultimately take us to that $14.3, $14.5 million area in terms of 25, 26. So that ultimately then affects our projections. So when we project, I know we've talked with the board a little bit about always working in 3 years, and so we look at 24, 25, which is our last completed year. We look then at 25, 26 because it's our partial year. We're about halfway through the year, so we can see the trends, whatever might have happened in 24, 25, are those trends holding in 25, 26? And then we use both of those years to then project forward to say, well, into that third year, when we look at 26, 27, is it kind of in line with the 24, 25 trend? Is it in line with 25, 26? Or do we see that arc just continuing to go upward? And so we're going to need a sizable medical adjustment, as we shared in the previous slide, of around $3 million in the general fund to try to catch our budget up to these trending actual expenditures that we're seeing, that sharp uptick in cost.
Mr. Longo, I missed the meeting in which you talked about those medical expenses, I believe, and I think the role of pharmaceuticals in that upward trend. Could you comment upon that? Just is that part of what we're seeing?
Part of it, yes. So I would say when you look at rising medical expenses, we've studied it with our consultant, Conrad Siegel. And first, I would say when you look at high dollar claimants, particularly those that are exceeding 100,000, 150,000, Conrad Siegel will begin to help track what the aggregate costs are because we have stop loss insurance. And so we want to know if they get to 300,000 and above, those individual claims can be reimbursed to us at anything above 300,000. So when you look at those, that trending data and the number of individuals who are breaching the 100,000 level or the 150,000 level, we're seeing more of them in frequency. And so if you go back to some of those years, probably like 21, 22, 2021, and some of those earlier years, we might only have 3 or 4 individuals who were getting above those thresholds. Now we're getting to the level of like 8 and 9, where they're getting above 100, 150,000, and then they're getting deeper into closer to that 300,000, which is also something that we hadn't really seen before. And so the number of individuals above those thresholds, plus how close they're getting to the 300,000 or just exceeding it outright, is one factor. The other factor is just the frequency in, I'll say, higher dollar claimants. So it's not just those very large shock claims that we see, but anything above 10,000, we've seen a frequency increase there as well, where the number of individuals reaching 10,000, 20,000, 40,000, 50,000 has also increased pretty significantly over the last 2 or 3 years. So those are a couple data points that speak to the utilization of the plan and why the medical costs are increasing that way. It's the total number of very high dollar claimants, but also the higher dollar claimants has increased as well. And then thirdly, I would say around prescription drugs, it's specialty drugs in particular. So when we look at, we've looked at this with myself, Dr. Bitts, Mrs. Ely, and Conrad Siegel as our health care consultant. If you look at all of our RX drugs and look at just the top 20, which are really specialty drugs, all of the RX drugs really have been pretty flat year over year in terms of what the total spend is. It's those 20 top drugs where we're seeing increases of over $1 million year over year when you look at the additional costs in specialty. And part of a driving force there is also the GLP-1 drugs for weight loss indication. And so we've taken that deep dive in that presentation to say, what are the factors influencing? And it really is, I mean, there's a number of factors, right? Post-COVID, the inflationary increases in hospital networks and providers, but if you were really to try to drill down and say, what are the 3 or 4 biggest factors? It's the total number of very high dollar claimants, the total number of higher dollar claimants and the frequency of them, and then prescription specialty spending, particularly around GLP-1.
So is that hockey stick that we're seeing kind of universal? Other districts are in the same?
Yeah, I would say so. One of our neighbors just told me they're at 20% increase for next year. I hear that from not just our region, but some others out east or out west. Have the opportunity to interact with colleagues from across the state in different settings. The other thing I would say is Conrad Siegel has even adjusted their own methodology, right? And so as they were giving us projections,
Yeah.
because we do, I think we're pretty good at benchmarking and doing our own projections, but when it comes to medical, which is one of the largest items in the budget, we do like to cross-check it against what does Conrad Siegel think, and we were outpacing their projections in each of these last 2 or 3 years, and even then, it was still exceeding both of our projections. So they've gone back to the drawing board, Conrad Siegel, to say there's something that they've seen changing in the environment, in the system, and they're updating their assumptions on terms of what to project for next year or future years. And in particular, it's around RX, especially drug, is what they're changing some of their methodologies on.
Yes.
So,
Hey, Mr. Frangel, yes. Talking with some of the other school districts in the area as well, and working with the intermediate unit, it's a trend across all that they're all seeing. And it's the same thing as Mr. Longwell has said. It's not just the GLP-1, but there's a collection of contributing factors that are playing into it. But it is a trend that they're all seeing the same, somewhere in the 14-15%.
Interesting. Thank you.
At the risk of,
Some these-
I was just gonna say, at the risk of saying this again, I think there's value in repeating it. That we need to acknowledge that this is a really hard conversation to have. Because the reality is that these are people's medical choices. These are people's lives in many cases. And it's hard to talk about, high claimants and prescription choices when you're talking about people's lives. And I don't envy any of you or any of the rest of us that have to dig into it because it just feels icky. But we've got to assume the best of intentions and acknowledge that there's an objective reality to what we're seeing, that it is influencing our budget in really significant ways, that we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't dive into it and talk about what those impacts are. So thank you for the conversation we had a couple weeks ago and the question and conversation today too, because it's not easy to talk about.
I have more questions.
Okay.
So you mentioned that there's a stop loss policy in place. Can you describe more about it, because I might have some follow-up questions?
Sure. So we're self-insured as a school district. We access preferred pricing, I'll say, by partnering with Capital Blue Cross, who is our provider. There's Highmark and others out there as well, Geisinger. Really, the first piece of that is that Capital has negotiated with doctors and providers and hospital networks, and then we pay them a fee to one, access their networks and those preferred contract pricing that they've negotiated. Two, they also will aggregate all of the costs and claims on a weekly basis, so they pay all the provider bills up front for us, but then they pass those bills through to us to be paid actually by us. The only exception to that is when individual claimants exceeds $300,000 during the course of the 12-month plan year, then in that case, then above $300,000, we would be reimbursed by a separate stop loss insurance policy. So the attachment point is $300,000, and which point that it covers. Or
Medication, doctor's visits, procedures,
Everything together.
everything for that individual. In the
Yeah.
12-month year. Or 12, yeah, a 12-month year. The $2.9 million that's in our materials, does that take into account already I guess, where stop loss has already?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so that would take into account the total estimate, and so when we look at the total estimate, we look at everything from the administrative fees we pay to Conrad Siegel to help consult us on our plan. We look at the administrative fees we pay to Capital to access their network. We look at all of the utilization data and claims data to see like what are the weekly costs we're paying. We look at what types of reimbursements we might get because the stop loss policy is kicked in above $300,000. In that bucket, we're also looking at how much premium share do we get back from our employees, depending on which of the medical plans they are. So really, we're trying to get to what's the total cost of providing the medical, and really what are all the different variables that feed into that. And that's kind of that bucket of here's the total then in terms of medical spend. Conrad Siegel is alongside us as our consultant to help navigate all of those different conversations and attach estimates to them. So, And we shop for stop loss as part of a trust, South Central Trust. That's the only thing I was going to mention is that as Mechanicsburg, we participate in a trust environment for healthcare. We don't share risk with them necessarily, but we get the benefit of purchasing our stop loss policies through the trust. The benefit of that is it's harder for a stop loss carrier to laser out individual claimants and say, the policy kicks in at 300,000, but these 3 people it doesn't, it might be higher. So we don't have any lasers in our policies, it's a flat 300,000. And so that's the benefit of buying stop loss as part of a larger group, because you might have not a very good year yourself, but it protects you against the stop loss making additional adjustments that might not be beneficial to the district because it's being purchased in the aggregate.
I just didn't know, because I don't recall the numbers from previous meetings, if we had enough of those high amount claimants where maybe like a lower stop loss limit would be beneficial.
Yeah, and we do measure that. That's a in-depth analysis that Conrad Siegel does on an annual basis, and they look with us. Interestingly, you know, I know 300,000 sounds like a high number, but the cost of the coverage is pretty significant. And so what they'll do is they'll say, okay, over the last 3, 4, 5 years, generally what has the district paid out in premiums to stop loss and how much have we collected back? And so the lower you make the attachment point, the more the cost is, exactly. And so for now, if anything, I think we'd be talking about, the trust has been talking about going the other direction, maybe making the attachment point a little higher. Because right now, some of the schools are paying more in premiums over the last number of years than they are getting back in reimbursements. But it can be very district to district specific, and we try to, some of it's the group size, some of it's the utilization, and so all of those things kind of go into like, what's the 300,000, what's the attachment point rather, 300,000 just happens to be ours, so.
And the stop loss really mitigates the outliers. Surprises.
Very significant.
Kind of mellowing that out a little bit.
Yeah.
With that concept.
Because there's always a risk that if you have like a shock claim that's like $1 million or $2 million, which you know, maybe 15, 16 years ago when I started in Newport, that was pretty rare to even say that. But now schools are seeing situations where they have individual claimants reaching, you know, maybe 600, 800, $1 million or more. And so that factors into the stop loss. How do we position ourselves with stop loss coverage, and where should that be? I will say, I just want to maybe reiterate something Dr. Bitts had mentioned. I always appreciate that he mentions and brings it up. Is that really we're just trying to tell the story around medical, right? You know, and we're not making any assumptions or, you know, comments about what it is or isn't, but rather when we look at the line, and kind of draft our projections for next year, the trend line rather, what's some of the underlying things influencing medical costs and where are we heading, and ultimately what do we need to build into our budget for 26, 27 as a result of some of the things we're seeing in the last couple of years, I'll say the current kind of medical environment. So. This one is our tuition reimbursement. Oh, okay, there we go. Tuition reimbursement has increased here in the last year or two in particular, and so it has a larger adjustment in our budget for 26, 27. I think when you look back historically from 2020 and on, you can see generally it would fluctuate a little bit, mostly between 400,000 and 500,000, I would say. But in recent years, if you look at 25, 26, we see that going above 600,000, and then even in 26, 27, we see that probably approaching 675, 700,000. And so we do need a larger adjustment in medical in the form of a couple $100,000 adjustment for the budget for 26, 27.
Do we know what is that just higher rates that are being charged by these academic institutions? Is it the more of our educators seeking?
It's,
you know?
I feel like it's probably both. I think certainly the cost of colleges, the per credit cost has probably increased over the course of these years, but the number of credits being sought is also increasing. I think it would be hard to suggest that the increasing trend we see there, like if you look at, it's interesting, if you ignore kind of the first 2 years there, it almost looks like a step chart going on from 22, 23 and on. And I think a fair amount of that probably is also the number of credits being being sought out or reimbursed as part of the yearly budget process or yearly tuition reimbursement process. PA Cyber Charter School, this gets into a little bit of the earlier question we had. When you look at total spend, you can see in 2015-16, probably $1.4 million, $1.5 million, somewhere in there. You can also see the two lines below that show our regular ed enrollment and our special ed enrollment. And then as you kind of project forward, you can see that little spike there in 1920 and 2021. I think certainly a lot of that was due to the pandemic. So if you kind of take that out of the equation, you can see our trend has been increasing from a cost perspective. One, we picked up some additional students along the way, but two, to Mr. Bradley's point earlier, the tuition costs, because it's based on our costs, our tuition costs to them have increased as well steadily over the years. And you can see as we head here into 24-25 and 25-26, we're seeing that around 4.8, 5 million. And then we're projecting forward needing a couple $100,000 adjustment in that line item as we look forward to 26-27. Down in the bottom left, I would just draw your attention to 2015-16 was 3% of our total enrollment, and then 24-25 was 5% of our total enrollment. So in some level from that 15-16 and on, we've added 1,000 kids in our regular education and special education programs in the district. So it seems natural that you would also pick up some charter school kids along the way too, because we've added 1,000 kids outright during that same period of time. But ultimately, charter schools is something we continue to study as an administration. So.
We actually did a little bit of analysis regionally of the percentage of students going out to cyber charter as a percentage of your enrollment, and we ranked very favorably in the region in terms of the percentage of students that were going out, among our peers. So we're glad to see that. So this is the part that I love to talk about most. This is the exciting part, the program expense adjustments. No offense, Mr. Longwell. Unfortunately, it's also the part where we probably have the most opportunity to be able to adjust expenses, which means these are the places that we have maybe a little bit more control over. And unfortunately for this year, that meant having to look at a number of things that we had to say no or not yet to, that we really would have liked to have said yes to. But the reality is that we still have some really exciting things going on, and we still have some really exciting additions to be able to make that we're determined to continue to see through even in the face of a challenging year. And it is, I've described it to many people as probably the most challenging budget we've had since 2010, when we had a number of challenges going on and districts everywhere had challenges going on. But challenging year, but still some real things to get excited about and celebrate. So we're going to talk through a few of these staffing, of course, being the major one. Obviously, you see the largest increase being total student services contracts. So these are all the times that a student's needs require us to find another location outside of our district for them to be educated. So whether that be a private company like River Rock or News Story, Diacon, or whether it's a partnership with the IU, whether it's a partnership with our consortium, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. All of those are student services contracts or special education contracts, and we're seeing continued increases there, not just because of tuition costs, but we have more students that are in need of those level of services as well, and we're determined to give students what they need. So there's a price tag that comes with that. Transportation, of course, continuing to go up, but we continue to be very thankful that we have a contract with a service that is providing us very reliable service. And we've talked about that a number of times over the years. And then, of course, reduction in other cost centers. We have 40-some meetings with teacher leaders and administrators around the district to be able to share their dreams and visions for their departments. And again, we had to have a lot tougher prioritization of those conversations this year. And ultimately, it does lead to a reduction there in what we're going to have for those other cost centers. So let's talk staffing. This is the diagram that we like to keep in mind because we are a very student-focused district. We'd like to believe all school districts are, but I can only speak for ours. We want to make sure that we're doing what's best for our students. And when we're thinking about staffing in that light, that means starting from the outside in. So if our students are at the center of what we're doing, then we need to try and make our decisions with that inner circle in mind. What are we doing for the people that are making all the difference day in and day out, which is our teachers, and as an extension of them, our instructional support staff. That doesn't mean we can just ignore those other layers either, because those teachers and instructional support staff need support. And that comes in the form of building administration, non-instructional administration, district office administration. So for many years as a district, we added a tremendous number of teachers in the district, a huge number, double digits year in and year out, almost 20 several years. But with that, we also had to continue to add some other positions in those other layers as well. But when we start doing our prioritization and when you see some of the positions that we are proposing to add, I think you'll see that prioritization coming out of staying towards our core, which is our student needs. So we did have a total of 17.5 positions requested. I share that with you just so that you know for reference that there were other positions on the table that were very viable and I would suggest our needs at different levels of need, but were positions that ultimately, as we prioritize things, that we did have to say either not yet or no to. But we are looking to add 5.5 new contracts in this budget that we're proposing, which is actually 7 new positions, but then some allocation differences because we have one teacher contract that we're able to reallocate from another program that we'll talk about in a second, and then a reduction of a half-time teacher contract as well. So the total projected cost of the staffing plan is $483,000, and even that $483,000 is further offset, as you'll see, by some other revenue and contracted expenses reductions. So what are we proposing as additions? These are really the 2 positions that come with no other offsetting revenue or anything like that. It's the art teacher and the tech ed teacher. So you might remember for fine and applied arts at the elementary level, we came forward with a thorough program evaluation to talk about how can we get guaranteed viable fine and applied arts in kindergarten and continue to modernize the offerings that we have at the other elementary grade levels. That progression to get us to that point involved adding a staff person per year for several years. So last year we added a new librarian, which we were able to hear just from Mrs. Snyder just the other week. Next year's addition is the addition of an elementary art teacher. And then there's one more addition for next year to get us to the full complement. Secondary in tech ed, right now we have a split position between the high school and the middle school for technology education. With the STEEL standards, the science and technology standards changes that are happening, there's an additional need for tech ed, particularly at the middle school, to make sure that we have a guaranteed viable tech ed class for our 8th graders. With that, we really need that full position to be at the middle school, but we still have the need, of course, at the high school. So we are looking to add that tech ed. So again, as you look back at that, those circles, both of those positions are teaching positions that are helping us to continue to advance our program in ways that we believe are important for the students.
Can I just ask a question there? So you said we have a person that's split now between the middle school and the high school, and we're adding one full extra.
Correct.
So what
Yes.
happens with the half and half?
So basically, instead of half and half, there's going to be a full at the middle school
So we're
and a
adding.
full at the high school.
Because the half of the middle school is going to go in theory,
Yes.
just not people-wise, but just
Correct.
room density.
Yes.
So it'll be a full.
Full.
Thank you.
So reductions. We have currently a half-time Keola teacher. So this is one of our Keola teachers that has hung on since the pandemic. We obviously had a huge complement of teachers during the pandemic in our hybrid year. We ended up whittling that down over the years, and we still held on to a full-time first elementary Keola teacher, and then we whittled that further down to a half-time teacher. At this point, we only have one student at the elementary level that's in Keola full-time. So continuing to maintain a half-time, half contract for that one student doesn't make sense for us. That teacher, it's not a furlough situation. We obviously are in a position where we would offer that person other opportunities if that's something that they want to do. Then the last one there, contract reallocation. Right now, as part of our consortium, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, we have what's called a newcomer classroom at our high school. It was something that we started several years ago, and it was a need across a number of our consortium districts. It hasn't been used in quite the way that it initially was, and at this point it makes sense for us to no longer have that classroom for the consortium and instead use that teaching service just for us here in the district, and we would reallocate that person to the elementary level where we have a need for additional ELD services. We also are proposing an administrative reclassification. So this is a payroll coordinator that we have in our business office who has been in that position as a support staff member. The size of our district in terms of payroll and benefits at this point really is something that this individual should be moved into an administrative role. So there's really a small cost of making that shift, but I think it is reflective of the responsibility that that individual has for the district.
Dr. Betts, we still have a Keola coordinator, right? Person in the district office?
Yes. They do more than just the full-time program, but they also support the online electives at the high school, driver's ed, summer school. So it's full-time plus. Yeah. Instructional support programs. So these are all additions that come with some sort of offset of consortium revenue and or reduction in contracted services. So our consortium, for anybody who's not aware, we have a number of districts. There's 5 of us, six, sorry.
My fault.
So 6 school districts from around the area that partner together to be able to offer certain programs at a more efficient way, we believe a more effective way at times, many times, than what some of these other private companies offer. And it also, quite frankly, gives us some cost savings to be able to run it with that efficiency in mind. So we all split up what programs are offered at different schools. We have begun just several years ago taking on more of the multiple disabilities classrooms. We started by adding that at the primary level, and now we're looking to take that on at the 4 or 5 level, and also one at the high school level. That obviously, because it's a consortium class, any student that goes into that classroom from other school districts, those districts give us tuition for those students to come here. And obviously, any student that we had been sending to a different school to receive those services, we were paying tuition for, and now having that classroom back in our district, we will no longer have to pay that tuition. So when I talk about the offset of consortium revenue coming in and us not needing to send expenses out, that's what I'm talking about. So really, for the sake of argument, you could say that these 2 additional classrooms are fairly cost neutral when you look at the budget overall.
And we have space for those, I assume.
And we have space.
Available.
Yep. So an additional MDS classroom at Elmwood, additional MDS classroom at the high school. Then the last one is looking at kindergarten. We had a program evaluation committee that got together that was run by Mrs. Bear and Mrs. Bott to be able to look at what should the future of our special ed program at the kindergarten level look like. There's increased complexity of needs that come to us in kindergarten every year. There's an increased need for readiness as students are coming into us. And with that, it has made us have to rethink how do we provide programming for those students and how do we meet those needs. because we've always prided ourselves on being as inclusive as possible in our kindergarten program and sending as few students out to other placements at the kindergarten level as we can. But the reality is that the needs have changed and we need to be able to meet those needs. So through that program evaluation, there are some additional things that they're excited to be able to do downstairs to be able to provide some additional pull-out opportunities for students here in kindergarten without having to send a student out. But in order to do some of the reconfiguring that they want to do, it involves the addition of another instructional assistant.
I want to add to this that early intervention for things like this over the course of a student's educational career, I mean, it's evident the further in their education they get. So I think it's great that we're adding more support and I think long term that'll be a benefit to not just the students but to the school.
And this may ultimately end up just being the first step, but the committee felt this was the right first step to take in kind of the reformation of what that should look like downstairs.
So is that a way that we'll be able to address students' IEPs or?
Well, those identified and those not identified yet,
So
because
we'll
we know
be
so
for kids
many.
not in special ed also?
Well, the addition of this resource will be specifically for special ed, but in order to allow those students to have this resource, we'll also open up other resources we already have for some of those unidentified.
But it's not a separate classroom?
There will be pull-out aspects to it for sure, but not a self-contained classroom.
But also having that kind of support on site, and as a parent, like it would incentivize you if you think your kid needs that support. Sometimes the incentive is get an evaluation so your kid can receive the support and get the proper intervention so that they can be successful moving on to first grade, second grade, and just that well-rounded support. And so I think it also incentivizes the partnership parents and the district have in supporting each other.
Yeah, the discussion was certainly on the table of do we need a self-contained classroom, and that's not the step we're ready to take yet, but we'll see. We'll see what. So that takes us to back to the summary, and we'll go through a number of charts here, just going back to where we started.
So as Dr. Bitts had aptly shared, kind of looking back and kind of coming back to the 50,000-foot view to say, we started with where is the budget in terms of proposed revenues and expenditures, what does the proposed tax increase look like, and then what's the resulting operating deficit, then had the opportunity to talk through what are some of the most significant changes in the expenditure side of the budget, and now as we kind of work through the presentation, we wanted to come back to where we are with that budget in terms of the preliminary budget deficit at 5.6 million. When we do adjust for the 4.3%, it gets to about 2.3 million of additional offsets in the budget up to that 5.6, bringing us to a total proposed operating deficit of 3,319,000. As we kind of then look at the 4.3% in the context of our financing plan, you can see the history there from 1819 onward, where we were increasing by 1%, 1.5%. And then our operational tax increase was anywhere from 1.4, 1.7% to some 3.5s in there, 2.9, and then this year it would be 3.3, taking us to the adjusted index of 4.3%. I think the other thing that's maybe of note for me as we look at other school districts and compare and benchmark, oftentimes when you look at their annual tax increase, it's all of the operating tax increase, right? And not that we're making it about a comparison among schools, but you can see where our operational tax increase has been really since 1819, living in the 1s and 2s, more recently a couple in the 3s, largely probably influenced by medical, right? And then you can see that construction tax increase was the other component for us of what was happening as we kind of narrate the story of our budget, of our history of tax increases, where that's not always entirely the case with other schools. They oftentimes are more just the operational tax increase. Down the right-hand side, then you can see the maximum allowable tax increase. So this is the adjusted Act 1 index that's displayed there, and you can see, comparing the two last columns on the right, what the total tax increase was in relation to that adjusted index. So as we look at the budget, where we were at with our projected proposed deficit, we've talked a little bit about the financing plan, the two elements of the construction increase and the operating tax increase. We wanted to spend a moment and talk a little bit about, well, what does that mean for our taxpayers, and particularly our residential taxpayers, but all taxpayers. So when you look at median assessed value and tax impact, we often like to look at all of our municipalities and say, what is the median assessed value among all of those properties? We look at the average annual tax bill based on that median assessed value, and then show what the 4.3% tax increase means. And so when you look at the kind of the middle section there, the 25-26 average annual tax bill would be $3,280, increasing to $3,421 for 26-27. Now, into that is the net of the homestead credits. That's another factor yet. But long story short, when you compare 25-26 to 26-27, it would result in an average annual tax increase of $141 for our taxpayers. This has come up over the years at times. We use median assessed value because there are some significant outliers in the property tax base, and so we've always felt, talking with the county, that maybe median's a little more representative in terms of assessing our residential properties. And then you can see the average monthly tax increase, 141, results in a 12 monthly increase, if you look at it monthly. The other thing we do so a couple more slides around benchmarking. This slide in particular, we're talking a little bit about where are we amongst our Cumberland County peers. And so you can kind of see we've generally over the years been in that third or fourth spot, just depending on us and Big Spring, where we are, but largely in that same positioning. You can see the real estate tax rates. You can see the increase from 24-25 to 25-26, and then you can see all of our earned income tax rates for each of the school districts. Sometimes people wonder, well, why are the earned income tax rates different? Well, some schools still have LST, if you remember the old wage-based, like what's your position and job-based tax. Some schools have per capita taxes, and so depending on where those schools are, that affects the earned income tax rate one way or the other. But largely, when you hear about increasing taxes, it's really more limited to the real estate taxes because of the Act 1 index and what our capabilities are. I think the other thing I wanted to mention here around real estate taxes, so prior slide, right, talks a little bit about millage. I think you could take a moment here and talk about funding equity. We talked about that in a previous presentation on the revenue side of the budget, but I think you can also talk about it here because the millage alone doesn't always tell the full story, because part of the story is also, well, how much assessed value does each school district have? What percentage of it's residential, what percentage of it's commercial, what percentage of it's industrial, and then to what degree has the state been able to implement funding formulas that help equalize the playing field, right? Because from one school district to the next, you might have schools that are more heavily residential and then other schools that are more heavily commercial, and that I think is really one of the driving forces behind the state's efforts in recent years to utilize more fair and equitable formulas to distribute state dollars. As much as I very much appreciate the increases they've given us in the last couple of years, I would suggest that it's just the first step or two. I don't know that we've reached funding equity yet because, as Dr. Bitts mentioned in one of our last presentations, I think we were around 471st in the state in state revenue per pupil. But then when you look at our schools in terms of relative wealth, the schools we're near at 471 aren't the same schools we're near in terms of relative wealth of schools, and so the idea of funding equity I think continues to be an issue. Part of an illustration of that, frankly, is the slide here on assessed values. You can see all the assessed values of all the schools. The one caveat I would mention is West Shore is a 2-county district, so this is just the Cumberland County portion of things. It gets a little bit confusing to try to compare both of their counties because they each have different tax rates and assessed values, and that we could talk about that the rest of the night probably. But at any rate, assessed value, and we do intend to come back with a board update for school board on the composition of assessed values. And so when you look at us as a school district, we're either, depending on the year, we're either first or second in terms of total percentage of residential assessed values against the tax base, right? So when you think about, well, what proportion of the pie chart is residential, what proportion is commercial, industrial, those things, we are a higher percentage than most all of our Cumberland County neighbors. And that's not meant as a, disparaging comment in any way. I think it just points back to the funding equity, right? That was the Commonwealth Court ruling. That's what the state's tried to do in the last several years, is try to make formulas that are more responsive to schools that are quickly growing in enrollment, that maybe have less commercial and more residential, and all of those things are factors that they try to consider in the newer funding formulas. But because whole formula still exists and is in the foundation, the state still has more work to do beyond that, in my opinion. Just a little benchmarking here that we like to do in terms of not just the state, but our intermediate unit at 15 here, and then the school district. So we like to look and say, well, how much revenue do we get per ADM? That's average daily membership, sorry, the acronym. So how much revenue, state revenue, do we get per ADM as compared to how much state revenue per ADM exists for the IU on average school districts, and then how much for Emmitsburg's. And there you can see we're below the state revenue per ADM for both the IU and for the intermediate unit. And then likewise, in terms of expenditures, you can see that same story play out a little bit in the sense of we're below the state expenditure per average daily membership, and we're also below the state average expenditure average daily membership for our intermediate unit when you're comparing other districts. So in terms of revenue per student, we're below both the state average and the intermediate unit average, and then in terms of expenses per pupil, we're below the average expenditure per pupil at a state level and also at an intermediate unit level. And so that's just some of the benchmarking we've done. Frankly, I would suggest in terms of ROI, return on investment, that those point to we're educating pupils at a cheaper rate than the average state school as a state, 500 school districts, and as average of the 24 school districts in our intermediate unit. And then when you think about how we're funded as a school district, we're doing it with less money on average per pupil than the state average and the intermediate unit average. So that's just another lens I like to look through as we talk about the budget. So the final piece is looking a little bit at our budget deficit at 3.3 million. And so what is kind of the right amount for our budgeted deficit? You can see back at 15-16 and onward, the maroon, almost said right, the maroon bar there is our total budget amount in the general fund. And so back in 15-16, it was around 60 million. And then you can see there where we're approaching 120 million in 26-27. And then overlaying that with what was our budgeted deficit in any one of those years. You can see, generally speaking, for the most part, it's been between 2.25% and 2.75%, 3%, somewhere in there. So in the 2s or 3s, or 2s or heading up to 3%, I would say. The exception there is one outlier year there where it probably was right around 2% in 18-19. But ultimately, as the budget has grown, the deficit has usually kind of kept pace. I'll say this about our budget deficit is our goal is always, one, the budget deficit represents kind of our operating risk, if you will. And so we know in a year, if it's a particularly challenging year, that is kind of the estimated amount of what we might be willing to use out of our fund balance. And so that's one way we try to look at that. The goal, I think, within each of those years also is we understand the budget deficit is what it is, but we'd like to cover the ground to get back to break even. That I think is the ultimate. Like if we could break even or have a little bit of a surplus in any given year or over the course of a number of years, that ultimately is our goal because it allows us to have a stable fund balance. It signals to me that if we're breaking even or having a little bit of a surplus, that the budget assumptions are in pretty good shape, that we don't have anything too crazy happening. But a signal of, hey, we've got a budget deficit like we did in 24-25, that does raise a question of, well, why did we have the budget deficit? And it was largely related to medical and a few other categories as well. But if you take medical out of it, 24-25 is a very different year. I think, unfortunately, that trend we saw in 24-25 is we're seeing again in 25-26, and so it will certainly impact our budget deficit, potentially a budget deficit again in 25-26, and it's just something that we have to monitor closely heading into 26-27. I think the other thing I would say about that is when you have a budget deficit, an actualized deficit, you want to take that deeper dive and say, well, what happened in the budget that gave rise to that? Were there some revenue estimates that were misses or something on the expenditure side? Really, with medical being one of the biggest driving forces behind it, then it leads us to, well, what type of adjustments do we need to make in medical to try to catch the budget back up? And you can see that's where that increase we talked about a little bit earlier of $2.9 million, $3 million, that's a pretty significant medical adjustment in our budget. But that's coming off a significant medical budget adjustment in 25-26 that we made and had this conversation about a year ago. And so our goal is to ultimately catch up to the medical trend, but we also see that, I think hockey stick maybe was Mr. Frengel's, that upward trajectory, which is a pretty sharp increase. So, yeah. You were going to say that.
Yeah, so we need to ask that question because, quite frankly, $3.3 million is still a little bit higher than what we want to be. 3.3 when we had to take our fund balance from 19-17 and from the 24-25 school year. And then when we are looking at this year and anticipating probably running an actualized deficit this year as well, if we have to take that fund balance from 17 to 15, let's say, for the sake of argument, having that operating risk of potentially taking it down to 12 next year begins to get in that territory. While we have it, we don't want to continue to pay, and we all know as homeowners, we can't pay your mortgage with your savings account year after year. It doesn't work. So even 3.3, while it's comforting to see that 3.3 actually is still in the ballpark of where we've been from a percentage basis in historical years, we know that we're coming off of 2 years where we've had to actualize those deficits. So we're also a little bit concerned even with the 3.3. So what have we done? What requests did we have to say no to even get us to the 3.3? Because we have tightened a lot of knobs to even get to this point. I would suggest tightened all the knobs to get to this point. There were 11 requests for new staff that we had to say no to, as we shared. We had a PSBA salary study adjustment to make sure that our support staff and administrative compensation continues to be competitive with the region. That was supposed to take place this year and go into this budget. We're putting that on hold, so not making any of those adjustments. We typically like to have a capital reserve fund transfer to make sure that these HVAC projects and all these other things are projects we can continue to do. We took that out of the budget. Most device replacements for students have been taken out of the budget. Most furniture requests across the board have been taken out. A new facilities truck replacement, we try and stay on a replacement cycle with those so that we're not having to do multiple of those in a year. That was removed. Really have continued to increase the square footage of our buildings. So we want to add a third shift custodian to be able to do custodial services overnight when the events are over at the high school. We had to remove that from the budget. Instrument replacements, many equipment things here, studio equipment for the high school, weight room equipment replacements, gym sound system replacement, FCS dishwasher replacements, and then miscellaneous other equipment projects and professional learning. A total of more than $3 million that we had to talk to those 40 cost center administrators, teacher leaders, and administrators and say, we can't this year. No, we're not yet. So we have tightened significantly to even get to the 3.3. But the reality is that we continue to still be a little uncomfortable at the 3.3. So what do we plan to do next? There are several positions that we have kept in this budget because they are positions that we are going to need as a district. But we do believe that this year we'll be able to leave them unfilled and actualize the savings from that money. So we don't want to take them out of the budget because, again, these are positions that we're going to need to have filled for the for the continued increase of our programs. But we believe that this year, because of enrollment numbers and some of the program changes, we can go with leaving these unfilled this year if possible. So one of those is Supervisor of External Programs. This is the position that Mr. Harris held, continued to advance our partnerships with other universities, with businesses, to be able to get students out into the workforce. Internships, dual enrollment opportunities continues to grow and continues to be a need. But right now it's empty, and we believe that that's an expense that's budgeted, that for this year we should leave unfilled so we can actualize those savings. Additionally, when we look at enrollment, and I'll dig into this a little deeper in the next slide, but when we look at enrollment, there is the opportunity, if positions open up, for us to go down 2 or potentially 3 teachers at the elementary level for this next year and be able to actualize those savings. What does that mean? Slightly higher class size than what we've been able to enjoy the last several years. So coming out of the pandemic, because of the decrease in enrollment, we were able to, the last number of years, enjoy class sizes right around 20 across our K through 3 level. And quite frankly, that was part of the strategy also coming out of the hybrid year, that we knew students were behind and struggling, so smaller class sizes would be beneficial for us. But the reality is now that our caps are higher than 20. At the next slide, K through 2 level, our caps are 23 students. At 3rd grade, it's 25. And at 4th and 5th grade, it's 28 students. We traditionally, historically, have ridden our classes closer to those caps than what we have since the pandemic. And ultimately, if we end up having some openings by people just simply moving out of the district or resigning or retiring, there may be the opportunity to not fill some of those positions. We're not looking to furlough anyone. This is potential actualized savings if openings come up in the right spots and we're able to move folks. So what do we analyze to determine when to adjust the number of teachers at elementary? We look at the rollover enrollment. So if we have X number of 2nd graders at Northside this year, then we would anticipate that being the benchmark for how many 3rd graders we're going to have at Northside next year, and at each grade level in each building. We look at the average class size. We look at the number of open seats below the caps that we could still continue to have move-ins come in. And the last one, particularly this year, I think is the most noteworthy, is we've got to look at the impact to staff as well. Because there's a continuity that exists of having a teacher in the same grade level in the same building that we want to be able to benefit from, not just for us as a system, but for the person as a professional as well. The reality is that we just asked these teachers this year, to implement an entirely new CKLA ELA curriculum. They just learned it for a grade level. So I take very seriously the possibility of having to go tell a teacher, I know that you just learned 3rd grade ELA this year, you worked your tail off to be able to make this amazing in your classroom, guess what, we need you to move to 2nd grade next year. I take that very seriously, but we also have a reality here that in some cases, we're not going to be able to leave class sizes at a particularly small number when we have the budget that we're running with. So all of those factors are really important for us to look at. So for example, this is directly from our spreadsheet. There's nothing to hide here about the numbers. This was as of, I don't know, yesterday, I guess the numbers were. But you can see right now we have classes in 3rd grade at 4, 4, 5, and 6 at each building. We look at the projected enrollment. We look at how many, based on the caps, would that mean our classes would be in each one of those buildings. Then we play with the number for how many classes to assign, and if we assign that number of classes, what will the average caps or class size be? What will the open seats be if we assign that number of classes? So for example, you can see they're up around the 3rd grade. This year they have 6 classes. Next year we're projecting right now for them to have 106 students. Well, if we have only 106 students at Upper Allen in 3rd grade, technically that's really only 5 classes that we need there. Could we keep a 6th one there? Sure. In that case, we're going to have average class size of 17.7, which is obviously well below the cap of 25. So that begs the question, if an opening comes up, do we fill that or not? Or do we move that down to 5 and still we're below the cap of 25? We don't want to go over the cap, but we'd still be under the cap of 25, still have 19 seats available for move-ins over the summer, but obviously have a little bit higher of a class size. But all the factors play into that. What are the needs of that grade? What are the needs of those students that are going into 3rd grade at Upper Allen? The staff, that continuity piece. So all of that is stuff that we have to weigh. But from the numbers alone, we believe if the openings come available, that there's 2 or 3 positions that we could be able to actualize savings for next year. Got any questions about that?
I'm glad to say that hear that you're going to consider the needs of the classes, because that certainly can make a huge difference. 20
Sure.
kids, and based on makeup of classes, can be much more difficult than 25 of
Yes.
other children. So I'm really glad to hear that you're taking that into consideration.
So what else do we plan to do next? Again, for those of you that have been around for a while, we've done some things over the years called program evaluations. So how do we look at particular aspects of our system and evaluate where we are in terms of educational effectiveness, operating efficiency, and potential cost savings? And if we evaluate a program based on those measures in that priority order, sometimes there are some things that we can do to be able to say, you know what, I don't know that we need to keep doing business this way. An example would be student device allocation. So we went one-to-one during COVID for a very specific purpose. At this point, those devices, particularly at the elementary level, are up for replacement. Before we just replace all those devices at the elementary level at the same time that we're having conversations about too much screen time for kids, let's go back and have a thoughtful conversation about, is that the right thing to do? Do we really need to replace all of those devices? Do we really only need to replace maybe half of those devices? And all of a sudden, when you're talking about technology devices, that's a few $100,000 in savings that can be kept out of the budget. So those are the kinds of things we don't want to make reactionary decisions for, and that's why we are still comfortable to a point with keeping this year's deficit, operating deficit, where it is, because we need to make sure that we make those decisions thoughtfully and not just to try and get that 3.3 to suddenly be 2.3 and try and make ourselves feel good. We want to do it with the program and students in mind. So that takes us back to the same spot. So 3.3 with a 4.3% increase. Obviously with 3.3, that includes those positions. So the hope is that if we are able to leave some of those positions unfilled, that the actualized deficit that we'd be pulling from fund balance would be closer to 2.8. But again, that depends on our ability, particularly on the elementary teacher side, to potentially keep some of those open for the school year. So next up is on April 14th for us to adopt the resolution for the intent to adopt, which is basically approving the preliminary budget. And then the final adoption of the budget happens in June, along with the adoption of the exclusion. Longest budget meeting ever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
I have a question. I work with storytellers for a living, and it's not lost on me that you said multiple times, we're trying to tell a story. And so when I'm doing a sort of literary analysis of this presentation, I can't help but notice that the 3.3 at the end of the presentation and the 3.3 that we spent time talking about related to medical expenses. And then we also had 3 million of requests left out. And there's, some relatedness. Is that part of your story intentionally, or is that just how the numbers
Yeah. I think
fell? And is there something related to that? So what I noticed that you'd like us to ask about or would like to discuss further?
I think the reality is that every year, for all those years where we didn't actualize deficits as well, there's always pluses and minuses in the budget. We get a few additional revenue, we have some additional expense, but the reality is that, and that's why we did spend an extra presentation on it, the healthcare has been a huge issue in terms of being so beyond what our trends and projections have ever shown. And when you look at it, I don't think it's coincidental that ultimately, when you look at how much we've ended up being over in total, it's really directly attributable back to that. Again, you could certainly add up some smaller pockets of money and say, well, actually, it's this, not healthcare. But again, that's true of every single year. There's smaller pluses and minuses. But the one that sticks out is certainly the healthcare.
And I guess the question I have related to the healthcare conversation is, are there any options? Or are we just like, this is the agreement we have, like, this is what healthcare looks like, we just have to deal with it, or do we have options? And I ask these questions like purely out of curiosity, with no judgment, or, it's not any one person's fault in this room that anyone's healthcare is attached to their employer, and so, but that is the system we live in.
So 3 ways to change the healthcare number. It's the structure of the plan, the people on the plan, or the behavior of the folks that are on the plan. The reality is that those first 2 are completely driven by the agreements that we enter into, whether it be the CBA or the Act 93 agreement, and the offerings that we provide support staff as well that aren't in either of those 2 agreements. The third one, the behavioral one, has probably is the smallest of the 3 that impacts the bottom line, quite frankly. And ultimately, Conrad Siegel will say that you can certainly, and it's always good for us to continue to look at wellness initiatives and how can we continue to help educate all of our staff to understand how to use their benefits in different ways. But again, the savings from that is usually pretty good.
No, I agree, and I think a couple areas, a couple points rather. One, Dr. Pritz is completely spot on. It really comes in the form of plan design, what's covered, what's not covered, utilization of the plan, and so much of that it's part of the collective bargaining agreement, it's part of the Act 93 agreement. All of those things have a term, so it's not like you're changing them year to year, but rather you're having those conversations as part of a larger discussion about the contracts or the employment agreements, things of that nature. And then the other thing I would mention to your earlier question around medical is, if you look at the increase year over year in medical, the budget that when we had this conversation a year ago, we saw the trends, and then we said, well, we've got to make a significant adjustment of the budget to try to catch up, right? And so we had increased the budget then by almost $2.3 million just to try to catch back up again. And so now we find ourselves having not caught back up and having to adjust the budget again by another $2.93 million. And so just over the course of those 2 years, we will have adjusted our medical line item by north of $5 million. To go back to something I shared about the trend we typically see, the 8%. So if you think about 8% for annual spend used to be just 2 or 3 years ago, $10 million. 8% on 10 million is 800,000. So in a typical year, we have been talking about, well, maybe medical might have gone up 800,000. Maybe medical might have gone up $1 million or $1.1 million or $1.2 million. But in the last 2 years, it's gone up over $5 million. And that, I think, is a big part of the story. Frankly, this is where all the years are interconnected. What happened in 24, 25, and then we saw that in 25, 26, and then what we're still trying to adjust and catch up to in 26, 27, just having to make very, very significant medical adjustments in our budget to try to track that trend down.
I love this slide. It talks about the impact of what a 4.3% increase in millage would mean. My first question is, does this take into account the common level ratio that must be applied to the assessed values?
So this would be the assessed values. If you wanted to try to convert that back to the market values, you would divide those numbers by the common level ratio. And so I
Oh, so
think,
this does take into.
yes, I'm sorry, it does take into effect. And I think our common level ratio is in the
1.47.
Yeah, percentage-wise, but yes, you would, as a percentage of the common level ratio, our common level ratio, you have to look at it, convert it to a percentage, and then you gross it back up to get it to the market value. So when you look at those, said another way, when you look at those, sorry, I'm flipping through the presentation. When you look at those median assessed values, that's not necessarily what is the median market value in those neighborhoods. So if it's 180 or 190,000, that probably generally translates to a market value of around 350,000 probably. My older home in the borough was in that 190,000 median, and then it was 350,000 is what the market value was.
No, because the assessed value times that common level ratio is generally lower than what you would see in Zillow, so I'm not going by that at
Sure.
all. But I love it because, you know, what we're talking about is literally like dollars and cents to make this budget happen. Like everybody's making sacrifices on all sides, and as like a homeowner, it's gonna cost me like 40 cents a day. Right? And so I just thank you for that because it's something that I can take and show you all, and it puts things in perspective.
And we tried to add some additional context in our presentations because I think even if you just talk about millage, that's even harder to conceptualize, right? You know, so what's the 5 mil increase or whatever it might be versus like a percentage increase, but then taking that extra step to say on assessed values, here's what that really might mean practically in terms of an annual increase in your tax bill that we all see in July.
Well, it feels like a good time to acknowledge the support of the board for the tax rebate program as well, to be able to help those homeowners, particularly those elderly homeowners, that even that smallest number of cents a day is still going to be a challenge over the course of the year. So the board's continued support of that is really beneficial.
Thank you for the work. Thank you for putting it together. For those of us that have been around for the 2010 budget, you know, we can relate to that was a tough year, and this has the makings of another tough year. But we handled it a little differently back then. So thank you for the work of putting it together, presenting it. So. Okay. All right, we'll move on to item 4, curriculum. 4.01, overview of the K-12 guidance plan.
Yeah, so this is a plan that we have to submit to the state every few years. All three of our presenters, both Dr. Mandia, Mr. Eastman, and Dr. Bridges, knew they were coming in after what would probably be a lengthy budget presentation. So I told them they had my permission to read the room and go through the slides as they see fit. But there's a lot of hard work that went behind these and behind the plan itself. An extremely lengthy plan that you have there in your board docs, and they're just going to hit the highlights of this plan for you.
So thank you everyone for allowing us tonight to come in and work on our hard work over the past 3 years of putting this plan together. And here we go. So previously the K-12 guidance plan was called the Chapter 339 plan. And it was done pretty much every 6 years, and it followed the comprehensive plan cycle. And it looked more at the mission, the philosophy, the role of the school counselors, where the new K-12 guidance plan, as the PDE calls it, is a little bit more future-ready focused, and it's very heavy in the career technical curriculum. And then the other big change is we're now on a 3-year cycle, and it doesn't necessarily match up with the comprehensive plan. And so you'll get to see us now every 3 years instead of every 6.
Alrighty, so thinking about the school counselor's role, it's really important to have somewhat of an understanding when you're looking at the comprehensive plan, right? And historically, it actually started as very career-oriented, so it's interesting to see how the pendulum has kind of swung back to like, oh yeah, like this is kind of the point of it. But there are also, it's 3 domains that it's broken up into when we're thinking about the services that school counselors provide. So it's the academic, the career, and then that social emotional component. But all of it really ties into that employability piece, right? Trying to build those students' skills. So I have a little like Swiss Army knife up there because when I think of the school counselor in the building, they're kind of like the Swiss Army knife because they're in all those domains, they're in all those arenas, just trying to help all students and having access to all students. So the plan you have in front of you, why it's so lengthy is because there's just a lot of different things that go into the role.
And knowing how much the role has changed was one of the reasons why we brought the school counseling department coordinators back as of last year. And so Dr. Mandia is our elementary school counselor department coordinator, and then Mrs. Katie George is our secondary. And it's very much needed because there are a lot of things to oversee and help with.
Yeah, so to understand who we are, it's really important, like I said, understanding the role. You know what a school counselor does. All of you have had a school counselor in your life at some point, right, throughout your academic journey. But understanding what we do in Mechanicsburg is kind of the point of our presentation for the evening. So here's a quick snapshot of who is in the school counseling department. So we are 14 deep, and I was actually lucky number 14 to be added in 2018. So I was the last addition. But in the last year, we've had 5 new members. So a lot of change, a lot of growth, a lot of just differences in the last year here, especially even adding Jeremy as our supervisor, and then of course Dr. Bridges as our director. So a very strong department, but definitely still growing too. And like Bethany had mentioned, bringing back the department coordinator roles, having an elementary and a secondary, I think has been really crucial to having us be more successful this year and having those opportunities to come together across K-12, right? I know elementary really well, Katie knows secondary very well, so bringing the 2 of us together, we're able to support the department because it is fairly large. So just trying to find those different ways to come together and really support students in the best way we can. One way that we support students is by getting outside opinions, right? We don't know all the answers. And one way that we do this is through our advisory council. So any good, comprehensive school counseling program has an advisory council as part of their program because they know, the answers in the room, but you have to invite the right people into the room. So here we have our participants on our current advisory council. So we're really looking for the student perspective, the parent perspective, a variety of district staff. This year we were very intentional about getting people from the different buildings across the district, and then community members as well as people from post-secondary too. So just really trying to think, what are the perspectives that we need in the room to make sure that the goals that we are trying to move towards are relevant, are going to help our students, right? So we could be working towards something that isn't exactly, is the juice worth the squeeze, to think of an expression. So this is something that we do twice a year. We bring people in from the community, we bring in those different partners and stakeholders, and I really ask them, what do you think? What's your opinion? What's your feedback? Here are the goals that we're working towards. What do we need to tweak? And how can we partner with you, right? Because really seeking those outside partnerships, I think, is where a lot of our growth has come from, so that we can help students in all those different domains, all those different areas.
So when I came on board 3 years ago, we really started looking and trying to bring together the counseling department and understanding, okay, what do we do? Why does this department exist? And we know that our mission is to support the district's mission in creating those lifelong learners, but really wanted to take some time and figure out, what do we do? Not that we, what do they do? And so we established the vision of our goal is to help unlock the potential for students, to help them overcome those obstacles, and then to help shape their futures. And really those 3 things can go in any domain that the counselors are working on, whether it's academic, social emotional, or even career.
So over the next few slides, you're going to see some highlights of the different domains and elements of the counseling program. And as we go through those, think about how the counseling role has changed. Like Dr. Mandia talked about, the fluctuation that we've seen. And so 3 of those specific areas are academic development, career development, and the social and emotional development. And the very long plan that you have in your board docs outlines all of this, but we're going to highlight it and compact it a little bit for you here. So they are providing counseling services and curriculum to assist students And essentially the goal of what this part of it encompasses is the occupational and the educational information that necessary for what our students are going to do post high school. So what can we do to assist with that realistic career planning for our students and the skills that they possess? So each level of counseling has their own calendar of topics that are taught. And it's scheduled as to what grade it's taught, what time of the year it's taught, and so it spreads across all three of these domains. In K to 5, it's typically through the counseling lessons that are taught in class to target these. When you get to secondary, the counselors deliver quarterly lessons, but along with that, there's the option of encore classes. And so a little bit more choice coming into it compared to just the exposure and the interest level. You now get to kind of take a little bit more action on what interests you. And then when we get to MASH, it also focuses into the career development classes, crew, advisory, and then the counselors will start meeting individually with students to start planning that post high school plan for them. Next, with the academic development, counselors assist with this new student orientation. The 504 case management is a big part of the academics that sometimes we don't think about in the counseling world, but it really helps guide some of those accommodations that our students need, not only through the academic development, but to find their interests as well. With staffings, individual student meetings, academic student meetings, and working with the social worker quite a bit as well when it comes to the attendance and making sure that our students are here and able to be engaged and participate for us to be able to do what the counselors need to do in that aspect. Moving on to career development. You're going to see 16 career clusters, and in each one of those career clusters, our counselors have put together resource links. There's community resources that teach students all about different aspects of each of those clusters. And for each of those, there's possible job titles, possible job options, what work-based learning opportunities do we have available, and then what does the post-secondary option look like, and what do we need to do to get them there. So it really helps a student have a realistic plan rather than just choosing a job and just saying that's what I want to do. And our counselors update that as new opportunities come available as well. So our orientation to career and technical options. This sounds like a high school thing, but we really start this in kindergarten. They are exposing them to lessons, activities, virtual options of what some of these jobs and opportunities might look like in the real world. And we have presenters coming at the K to 5 level. There's lessons from the counselors in these areas throughout the year as well. And then when we get into middle school, they have a little bit more opportunity for that hands-on and specialized opportunity, such as BizTown, our junior achievement program. They work on interview skills, resumes. What does that look like? What is, what do certain jobs want in those? And then in every year in middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, there's a career inventory that's done. And then when we move into 7th and 8th grade, they have the opportunity to take that career inventory and attend career days and get some more specific information from someone in that role, and see if it piques an interest, or maybe it sways them the other way and they want to go with option number 2 after that opportunity. But the whole point of it is for them to see those options and what their skills are taken there. Career education and work. You'll see in this image here the different CEW strands. So when thinking about artifacts, PDE requires that all districts provide opportunities for students to explore, experience, and learn about career opportunities and work options post high school, post graduation. And in each of the strands that we report to the state, not only do we have to have a minimum of 20 artifacts by the time they graduate, but also each of these strands have to be covered in each of the 3 bands that we report. And so these students, you know, like we talked about, starting at the kindergarten level, they're really getting some of these basic interests in what they see maybe family members doing, or other people who are important in their life, and then taking that into middle school. We'll see it as it progresses through the system.
So 2 years ago, we started, actually 3 years ago, we started looking at some different options for career and development platforms. And so previously, to my arrival, most of the CEW artifacts were all kind of housed in Google Classroom, and spreadsheets and things were manually done. And so we really wanted to try to consolidate. So we had put a committee together to start looking at various different platforms. Zello was the platform that we went with, and so the first year we did a phased implementation. So the first year was just high school, and so we worked with Natasha Clever, who has previously been here to talk about the secondary high school part of CEWs, and they really focused on restructuring career development and the graduation project. And so one of the things that I really love at the secondary level is it doesn't just fall on the counselors. We really tried to be intentional in terms of how we embed them, not just in with counselors, but how we have a whole career development class. So how can we put some things in there? And then I know Natasha has been very hardworking in terms of, okay, how can we get different artifacts out into math and science and history? And really trying to embed it in everything that we do. We then phased it into the middle school, and she was doing the same sort of thing with BCIT, FCS, and working through all the different encore classes at the middle school. This year we started at the K-5 level. One thing that's unique about Zello is they really try to engage the students. And so at the K2 level, the module obviously begins early as kindergarten, and they take them on an adventure. It's a little bit more gamified. And so they go on an adventure through Careertown, and they have to solve mysteries, and it takes them to explore all the different options. When Jeremy was just talking about this, so in kindergarten, we're looking at the farm and the park. First grade, we're looking at a pet grooming shop and an art gallery. So we really try to expose them to a lot of different careers, and just so that they can learn about, hey, this is what that person is even called. This is what they do. Here's where they may work.
And they love it. They just adore it. It's so funny because like it is a gamified experience for them, but within it there's also like checks for understanding. Like it'll ask like who is the career that uses the blueprint, like like it's like there's the construction site one, or who is the like, and it's teaching them and just exposing them as young as like kindergarten to like there are lots of options out there, because like Jeremy said, sometimes you want to do what mom or dad does, but sometimes you want to do something completely different, and like this is nice because it just makes it really engaging for them. And then as you can see on the screen there too, in the third grade level, it's less gamey, but more like getting into the interests and the skills. So not necessarily an inventory, but getting them to ask those questions of themselves, like, what do I like and what am I good at? And like that's so important for them to find a job. Like I'm always telling them, you see your teachers more than you see your parents. So find a job that fits you, find something that you like. And I think this has been a really good introduction for that career piece and making it more intentional for us across K-12.
Absolutely. And then obviously as you get into the secondary, the bottom graphic on the right, it becomes more age appropriate. And that's really when we start to build the portfolio. The graduation project, one of the final tasks is to present your portfolio. And so all of the students' artifacts and the career development lessons, everything is housed in Zello, and then you can create the portfolio that they will then present their senior year.
Does anybody interact with the kids when they're going through at the elementary level, or is it all just the student and the computer, or does the teacher somehow get involved?
Yep, so at the elementary level, I'm the school counselor is the one that puts it on at this point. This is our first year of implementation with it, so we're just kind of dabbling with like, well, is there some lessons that we could do, because there's so many different options. But there's some lessons that the teacher could probably, especially after we do the initial introduction on like how to get into Careertown, like how to make your profile. But there's a lesson component that you initially do to like teach about the jobs and the careers, ask those questions to get them engaged in thinking, and then they go into Careertown and do the exploration. And within the Careertown, it's nice because, again, there's those checks for understanding, but also those teachable moments of like, at a hospital, there's like the nurse, but there's also the doctor, and then like it talks about a variety of jobs, and then there's a game too. So like at the hospital, it always gets me every time because like they have like all these beds that they have to like get through them so quickly, and by the end, they're just like, that was stressful. I'm like, yeah, some career environments, they're gonna be quick paced. If you like quick paced, that might be a good fit for you. But if you still want to do something medical, maybe you want to do a school nurse, you know, like, or something that is like more like individualized and not like hospital setting. So like getting them to already think about that, I think it's a really cool tool.
And that was one of the reasons why we also like Zello, is it's not fully, I'm just gonna sit on the computer.
Yeah.
There's that interaction, there still allows for the teacher to bring everyone full group. Now, obviously, as we get a little bit older into the middle school and high school, we have been very intentional at the high school that we're not doing necessarily the Zello lessons that they provide. Tasha has done a fantastic job with her department to develop the lessons, and they're very customized to Mechanicsburg. But knowing how hard it can be to engage and keep our youngest learners on task, we really wanted to look for something that would do that, and we really felt out of everything that we looked at Zello was that right fit.
Just one question. Is this the portfolio that the state used to come in during PSSA and they look at the pieces? They still do that?
Yep.
Do they?
They pick a student randomly and say, please show me their artifacts.
Oh, that's
And-
fun.
Yeah.
Isn't that
Oh,
fun?
it
We're
is,
getting ready for
yeah.
it.
I was enjoying it.
We've had that, what, now 2 years in a row?
Yep.
So
Between across the river, we're close.
Yeah.
You know, just gotta expect it.
they've actually said that to us. So the career and academic plan, again, Mrs. Clever has been here before to kind of talk about how they revamped this. So our career and academic plan starts in 6th grade, and they do it every single year until they graduate. And so what it does is it not only looks at what classes am I going to take, it is also looking at what are my interests and how does it change from year to year.
Like Jeremy talked about already a little bit, we have counseling curriculum at different levels, and it looks different, of course, based on the level. So at that elementary level, it is really the school counselor going into the classroom at least once a month to provide those additional lessons for those employability skills. From self-management skills to relationship skills, there's just a variety based on the career education work standards, but also career readiness. So really trying to hone in on that, what's going to help them be successful in the future, no matter what route they take. So that's what it looks like at elementary, but then at the secondary, it's more integrated and then also collaborative. So through like BCIT, career development, crew advisory, they're still getting the content, it just looks a little bit different versus elementary. But really just trying to focus in on how do we make them decent humans and how do we get them a job at the end of the day? You know, that's our goal. And then, of course, to keep us on track, we have our calendars. So each level has a calendar to keep them on track for each month. What are we looking to do? And, of course, that depends on the building. It depends on what's going on throughout the year. For example, those new student orientations that Jeremy was talking about, it's pretty heavy at the beginning of the year for us school counselors. Whenever we get a new student, like we're the ones that are touring them around the building, getting them the resources that they need, making those connections. Do they need a new backpack? All the different things, but then that also happens throughout the year. You know, I just got a new student last week. So we're still doing it throughout the year as well, but it's more heavy at the beginning of the year. So the monthly calendar really helps to keep us on track because, you know, there are just so many components, so many moving parts. So having that to go back to, oh yeah, we're getting close to October. It's time to get our Unity Day, you know, materials ready or whatever is coming up in that month.
Mental health. So I know that this is a very hot topic and is a very heavy topic. And so when we, social workers and I had come to the board last month or 2 months ago to talk about trauma, mental health was one of those topics. And I had shared there that our county supports look a little bit different now in terms of our SAP support. So PDE and the state, they require every school district to have a SAP team. And however, the regulations only talk about how we need to support drug and alcohol. And so unfortunately, budget cuts happened to state and county levels, and the county no longer provides us a mental health liaison to support our SAP teams. They do provide a drug and alcohol liaison from the county. So that left a lot of districts in a state of panic, so to say, in terms of how are we as school districts going to target mental health. And then even going beyond that, what is our role in that? You know, we spend so much time with the students, and we know that sometimes what happens at home does trickle over into what happens at school. And so one of the ways that we want to respond to that is, you know, working with Dr. Bitts and Cabinet, is to look at developing a mental health district committee and really looking at what is our philosophy as a district, what is our role and responsibility, and how do we go forward and address the mental health concerns that we have for students. But in the meantime, we have 14 amazing school counselors, we have 4 amazing school social workers, and between those professionals, we are able to handle on a daily basis some of the mental health concerns that we may see in school. And so, you know, just talking with our parents, talking with our stakeholders, trying to keep that communication up with all of those various stakeholders so that we know how to best support our students when they're with us for those 7 hours a day.
All right, so the counseling program goals, if you go to the plan, this starts on page 16. It's about a 5-page chart that you'll see that kind of outlines our goals. And then the next slide kind of gives you a summary breakdown. So when looking at the academics, it really just shows you that we're using our sources of data to try to interpret what the student needs are, and then meeting those student needs and using our resources to do that. When it comes to career, you heard a lot about career tonight as far as Zello and the artifacts and their exposure to that. And then when as far as the social emotional goes, you know, they are addressing an increase in student need in that area. And the one thing that I have loved to see, coming from a district that was in the consortium prior to this, one of the things that we did on a PD day was a solution-focused counseling. And that is something that I see embedded and implemented. And so this counseling department really takes the professional development opportunities that they have seriously. It's something that they are implementing and using as a good resource, which these students need, along with the strength-based strategies that they utilize. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, definitely. So solution-focused is just a really great mindset and a great toolbox to use for a school counselor because it is time-sensitive. We don't have a lot of time to meet with students. We don't have hour-long sessions with students because there is the school day, right? So we only have a little bit of time. So with that time, try to make the most of it. So what we did is we had our presenter come in, Russ Sabella, who's like a guru in school counseling, solution-focused. He came in and presented to the consortium. So like we were talking about earlier, a great way of savings was that we were able to afford a guru to come in and teach us because it was multiple districts together. And then from there, we were able to do a book study on like, well, what does solution focus look like for a school counselor across different tiers, you know, for the lessons, for individual check-ins, but also even when as far as like parent-teacher conferences, how do you make it more strengths-based? How do you help them look for exceptions and make it a more positive experience? So that's been really something that we've been growing in, and then this year is really like that implementation piece. And it's because it's something that can be used across K to 12. So it's a really good tool for our toolbox. I'm just trying to be really intentional with the time that we do have students. Yay, you have some pictures. So this is just a little snapshot, kind of based on like what we were sharing with the goals. Our goals always really try to align with the district goals, obviously. So we have a couple examples up here. So at the tier 1 level, all students have a chance to participate in our school-wide celebrations and events. So one example is our Unity Day, which really ties back into that belongingness goal. We also try to make our environment more belonging, so between like signage and really just like having staff out and about. really trying to make students feel like this is a warm and welcoming place where they can do their best and grow in learning. And we have an open door policy. You know, I mean, my door is shut there, but it's never shut. So just having that, and like a lot of our counselors really take that seriously, because between staff and students, we're there to support everyone. We've had different opportunities to provide staff professional development as well. So in addition to our goals, there's just so many more things that we're adding on, right? At that tier 2 level, we have, you know, students that are on different, you know, behavior plans that we're supporting them, trying to provide that positive reinforcement, small counseling groups, utilizing the CASEL framework and the competencies within that, so that they're feeling more successful in those different skill areas that they might be having deficits with. And then even leadership programs too, right? So I feel like we spend a lot of time focusing on and talking about like the other end of the spectrum, but we honor all students. We want to support all students. So no matter where you're at on that spectrum of need or skill, we want to be helping you grow and thrive. So just something that we can do across the board with our goals, and it just aligns with the district's mission as well.
And so the last point I wanted to highlight for you is a program review. This is new in the counseling plan that we are submitting. It wasn't in the previous Chapter 339 plan, and this happens continuously. We meet with Lisa and Katie on a regular basis. Each individual department, you know, we go to the elementary, middle, and high school counseling meetings on a regular basis, along with the department meetings, and anything that is an issue or in the program or anything like that can be discussed at any point in time to try to make sure that our program is updated on a consistent basis. So this isn't something that we're going to wait for 3 years and look at it again. This is continuously updating as we go, and then when that plan comes around, it's just going to be us putting on paper what changes we have made.
Questions?
So knowing that you came, I have about 100 questions I read page by page, just to make you feel comfortable presenting in front of us.
Did Tara talk to you?
No. Jeremy, you took me back for a minute there when you were talking about K through 12. Because thinking of counseling and thinking about career counseling and direction, going that far back, we used to take some type of an aptitude tester, and he kept telling me I was supposed to be a politician or something. I don't know why. But,
I think that tracks.
But it's interesting to see how, as you said, it gives them the opportunity to see some of the dynamics of some of the different positions that they're in. But it also is kind of, it's interesting to think that they're planning, you're working with them to plan them. You're working with the students to think that far ahead and start to find out what interests them and things like that. I know sometimes it's more eliminating the things that you know you don't want to do, as opposed to the things that you find or you're interested in. So I thought I was hearing wrong, but as he kept repeating K through 12 and K through 12, and then Zillow sounding like a good product or a good tool, it's interesting. I was also very surprised when I actually saw the numbers on, I think it's page 4, of the ratio of 1 to, you have almost 240.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's a...
I know them all and I love them all.
Yeah. And as you said, you don't get an hour, you get passing by sometimes. Yeah. So thank you for the work that you do and putting this together, and the coordination with all the different levels and everything to kind of keep focusing and working and moving forward with it. So.
I just have some personal and professional feedback. When my daughter went through Mechanicsburg, she was a really big fan of Mrs. Pirtle and Mr. Kessler, the school counselor at that time. So that was our running joke. She was a high flyer, not for behavior, but for social emotional juice and crackers. Yeah. He was always like, yeah, I need to go see the counselor. Also, personally, it's taken me a minute, right? That you're a school counselor, you're not a guidance counselor, right? Yeah. So that has really, I love that it's swinging back, that you don't just in 9th through 12th show up at the guidance counselor's office and fill out the aptitude test and say, do I go to Juniata College? Do I go to Penn State? And then I was 85 and it was like some kind of newfangled computer technology, and we were all a little like, and then you got the printout of what schools you should go to based on like what? You don't know anything about me. Professionally, I love the work that, the district is doing at the K through 12 as far as career readiness. As a social worker, oftentimes when those kids show up, in my room, they've had experience working with some of your lessons around career readiness, and they're understanding what those artifacts are. So when they come and they're really upset, or, oftentimes that's an avenue I take. So what are you thinking you want to be when you grow up? Oh, then you're going to be in school for a really long time. So we have to figure out ways to stay in the classroom. But, it's really nice. It's very affirming, and the work you do is amazing and wonderful. And I was always like, oh, I don't want to do career artifacts or 504, so I'll go to social work. That's just that's a lot. It's too much. But, back in the day, right, it was like, I'm going to be, I don't know, photographer. No. And then in 10th grade, no, I'm going to be, a fashion model, or fashion merchandising. That was a thing. I was in high school. Everyone was like, where are you getting this idea from? So I love the program, right, that you can take from K through 12, and they can just keep advancing. And I was thinking the whole time, your goals and mission from that, your vision really aligns with that. Resilient, self-directed learners able to achieve personal goals. What is your goal? How do you get there? Of course it's going to be hard. And that's how you develop resiliency. You do some of the hard things, not all the hard things, but some of them, right? So yeah, it's fantastic. Love it. Very exciting. Budget stuff was good. Wrong, Mr. Longwell, Dr. Pitts. I was like,
it was a hard one to follow.
This I was like, okay, my wheelhouse. Let's talk about this. This is good stuff.
Trying to figure out if I can create a Zello.
I'm telling you, they love it. Like, whenever they see, when are we doing that again?
And parents do have access to Zello, so you are able to get in and you're able to see some of the things that your children have done or will be doing. If you need links resent, just let us know. We can resend everything.
I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I go. But I do want to say thank you for everything you do. I was looking at some of this plan. It's so comprehensive. But what I really enjoy most is when my kids come home and they share. They're learning how to speak about their challenges. They're learning how to speak about the future strategies. And sometimes they tell me, you need to, was it blow a bubble or catch a bubble?
Yeah, smell a flower,
not being
blow
a
a bubble.
bucket filler right now, so it helps me too. But seriously, it really helps them understand and cope with this changing world as well. So.
Yeah, I always tell them they're lifelong skills. You know what I mean? This is not something you just need in 2nd grade or 3rd grade. Like, you need to be able to regulate. You know what I mean? Like, no matter what job you have. And even getting along with others, even if you were, I always say, even if you work remotely, because more and more jobs are working remotely, you're still gonna have to interact with other people in some capacity, right? So just giving them those foundational skills and letting them know, like you said, things are hard sometimes, things are tough, but so are you, right? You can get through those challenges.
That's why I really love what PD has done. Instead of saying we need social emotional standards, they have said, okay, these are job readiness skills, and how can we tie the two together? And so they've created a K-12 PA readiness skills, and when you look at it, you're like, oh, those are social emotional skills. But really, they're things that we need to learn to get along in life and to get along in jobs. And so I really do love how they've tied them nicely together, because I really do think you're right. These are things that we need to learn to do for the rest of our lives. So we appreciate the opportunity to come and present to you guys today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night. So we'll have that to approve.
Alrighty.
And everybody has to make sure to read all 141 pages before the next meeting, so
Yes.
if you have any questions.
There'll be a quiz.
There'll be a quiz. All right, moving on, thank you. Moving on to item 5, personnel, athletic trainer contract.
Not as exciting
Mr.
as
Anik, thank you for hanging in.
Yeah, of course. That's what I get for trying to change some structure here.
You got it.
All right, ready for me?
Yes.
let's see. Mr. Moss, do you have this one? That's okay. Thanks, sir.
Right. So I am here today to discuss our athletic training structure, and I'm here because it's possibly going to change. So those that have been around and those who haven't, I'm going to just kind of go through our history and sort of talk about where we were, where we're at now, and hopefully where we're going in the future. So it's crazy to say 1996. When you say 1996, it doesn't seem that far back, but that's 30 years ago. So Dr. Zettelmoyer became our full-time athletic trainer in 1996. At that point, we had one full-time athletic trainer, and he did that by himself really for 10 years. There were some stipended positions with him, just some extra duty contracts with people who were certified. But then in 2005, we gained Amy Driver, who's also our athletic trainer now. Amazing that one's been here 30 years and the other one's been here 20 years, so we have 50 years of experience between the two of them. They were on an Act 93 contract at that point. In 2015, we restructured a little bit and went to an Act 93 250-day contract with a head athletic trainer and then the 210 underneath. And then in 2024, we decided that really for a couple reasons. One, for our student athletes, just to be able to get more care, but also just the layout of our district. We decided that we had a lot of events uncovered. When you think about the middle school, north side for soccer, the stadium, and then our high school facilities, we were going in 4 or 5 different locations. We only had 2 athletic trainers on site, so a lot of our contests and practices were uncovered, and that just didn't feel like our standard. So at that point, we contracted out for a 3rd athletic trainer. That contract was for 2 years, and OSS won that bid. So the reason we're talking now is for 2 reasons. One, Dr. Zettelmoyer, as you know, you approved his retirement last month. He is unfortunately retiring in June. He's been a staple of our district. I'm sure maybe Dr. Bitts spoke at that meeting, I'm not sure, but we will miss him. He was the athletic trainer when I went to school here, and then for my last 10 years here as the AD, and he's done so much more than just what you would envision as an athletic trainer. I won't go into bore you with what he does, but it's significant. And also our contract is up with OSS. So what we decided to do, with Sandy giving us the inkling that he may be retiring this year, we sent out an RFP to the local, it's Penn State Health, OSS, Dreyer, Select Medical. We send all these RFPs out to those companies, and we asked them to come back with a estimate of what 1 athletic trainer would cost and what 2 athletic trainers would cost the district. Our vision is to still have 3 on site. It's not that we were asking for a 4th, and I'll kind of explain why we're going there. So just so we actually received 2 bids, one from Penn State Health and one from OSS. Very similar. Penn State was the lower bid, and for those that know, Penn State Health also has our physician contract with our school district. They work with the athletic department, but as well as the school district with our nurses. So we have a history with Penn State Health. So what we want our structure to look like moving forward. We do intend to have 1 school district athletic trainer. The vision would be Amy to be our athletic trainer. She is still employed. And then we would go to 2 contracted athletic trainers. And with the bid being lower at Penn State Health, that's who we would recommend. So this would still be 3 athletic trainers that we would have access to. The reason we would look to go to this structure, for one, it is flexible. We would engage in a 2-year contract. We could see how we like that relationship. There are some significant cost savings after all the budget conversations over the last couple hours. I'm actually coming to you with a lower price for what I usually come to you at. So we're I don't have an exact number as far as what it would save. It would just depend on where some of the salary structure goes, but we're talking probably 75,000 or upwards to 85, give or take. And then as far as what this could look like, we still would have the one school district, and then both would be Penn State. So what our student athletes would see is really nothing different. They would still have care that they have for the last 30 years. The two contracted employees would typically just be your practices and contests. The MASD employee would be more the intimate relationship with the school district, handling things with me, handling, they deal with, even when you have a student athlete has a concussion, how they come back to school. That would be what that person would handle. So any questions on where we potentially could go? Dr. Lebo.
Yeah, the contracted trainers, that's not just for the position. I mean, that's two people who would consistently be with us?
Correct. It would be a 40-hour a week position for 40 weeks. So summers would be light for them, but it would really just be what we're doing now.
I thought that's what you said. I just want to make sure it wasn't like they would just have somebody fill that. It would be
No, and we actually meet, we engaged in this 2 years ago with OSS. We actually met with the candidate that they sent us and did an interview process with them, just like we would do with any of our regular school district employees.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry for the dumb question, but what exactly does an athletic trainer do?
What do they do? So it's a good question. First and foremost, the safety and care of our student athletes is what they focus on. They are at every contest that we have, and they are available for every practice. So any athletic injury they're handling. They also run what we call a clinic. So what you would envision as far as rehab or therapy for an athletic injury, where you would go to OSS or Dreher, they are doing that in-house at our athletic training room. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it looks like a little rehab center as far as athletic injuries. They are doing, they take care of our AEDs. They develop plans for coming back from injury. There's some prevention injuries that they talk to our coaches and our athletes about. So the list is long, but they are, yeah, go ahead.
Well, because the price that we're paying seems kind of low for a person who has that type of.
Yeah, some would probably ask, why do they do that? These companies, one, they want to be in our building. That's part of it. I think their hope is that our athletes would then go to maybe their doctors to see them for their sports injuries. We don't encourage that necessarily, but that is part of the reason as far as developing relationships with school districts.
That's not what that worker is getting, right? That's just what we're paying the system.
We don't actually ask, but no, that is correct. I wouldn't imagine that's what their salary is.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say, my wife was a certified athletic trainer, so I think she would prefer not a contract position, but she's
Sure.
here. But she would also prefer OSS. But I mean, one of my concerns though is because we have our athletic field so spread out. I mean, how do we have ample coverage? And if so, because I know like some campuses they can just kind of get on the gator and get where they need to
Yeah.
go. What is the plan, I guess, for these trainers moving forward if they do need to get to a non-contact sport somewhere else, if there's an injury or anything like that?
Yep, so within the RFP, they do have to have access to a vehicle. And I don't want to go back to 2023, but where we were 3 years ago, these are all great questions because we are in a significantly better place. We do have, our athletic trainers are always on call as well. I'll be honest, there are times where there is a site that if we have practices at the middle school, but we have games at the high school, the stadium at Northside, we go to the games first, the contest first. But they are always on call. We are within 2 miles. Our coaches are first aid certified. There's always 911 too if there's a significant emergency.
I assume the contracted trainers would have the same like compliance trainings.
100%. Yep.
Yeah, okay. I played high-level tennis in high school, and I don't think I even knew an athletic trainer existed until I played in college, because I never saw one, knew I could ask for one, knew that was an option. So curious how, if at least like the students and the coaches know like when a referral might be right for the sports that are lower contact and might not have the regular visibility. Like, is that awareness even there?
So we go to all of our parent meetings, and our athletic trainers go as well to educate on those kind of things. Our athletic training room is actually kind of the hub of our athletics. It is right at the end of the high school where it kind of leads out to the parking lot, and I'm not saying you get educated in there, but that is really where our student athletes kind of congregate and then disperse to their sport. Maybe this is a knock on me, but I bet you people know Sandy Zettelmoyer more than they know Seth Banning because they see him much more than they see me. So it's credit to how they operate.
I would just add to that I think having had 2 kids who played high school sports, 3 played middle school, I mean, I feel like you do a good job of introducing the trainers to the students, and just the reputation that I know that Sandy had and the program has. I don't know any athletes' parents who would go somewhere else first before going to see Sandy or the staff there. I mean, you guys have a great reputation.
Sandy actually did some kind of first aid on my husband in our garage one night at 9 o'clock, and I was just like, for goodness sakes.
I'm sure I wouldn't hear that, but I believe it. They've created the gold standard around Central PA. I do believe that, and that's credit to Sandy.
Other questions?
So we would move this forward as
Sorry,
well
yeah.
for April to approve.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Steph.
All right. And lastly, we move on to policy 601, first reading of revised board policy 718, service animals in schools.
Yes, thank you. These are some legal updates that PSBA put on our radar based on some code changes. It's important to note that service animals in schools, this policy does not apply to our therapy dogs. This is for service animals that individuals are bringing into the school environment or onto field trips and all those kinds of things. The main changes here that the law began to adjust were obviously the green sections, but it really focuses on what questions we're allowed to ask of those folks that are bringing a service animal and what questions we are not allowed to ask for someone who's requesting to bring a service animal. So again, that's where most of the law changes came from. Frankly, this isn't something that we have to navigate very frequently, but certainly keeping the policy up to date.
I noticed in one place that it was struck out as far as the vaccinations and that kind of thing, but then later I thought it was back in. So do we ask? Under delegation of responsibility, I think it looked like it was put back in. Oh, here it says annual submission of documentation of vaccinations and immunizations.
Sometimes they just move the location of
Is that
different.
why it just
different.
Okay, so I was just wondering if we do request that or require since it's struck out.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's one they just moved.
And they go to the principal first for that?
Yes.
And then the principal ultimately sends it up to.
Typically communicates pretty quickly with student services about it. Yeah.
I was not aware you could have miniature horses.
I know, that's.
Well, I was gonna ask that question because it's an interesting little, of what are considered service animals? And it would be
Dogs and miniature horses.
dogs and miniature horses.
If you look up a miniature horse, it looks very much like a dog.
And what was kind of neat about it to me is, because I was worried about dogs and allergies for people, that then you can have a miniature horse, you're allergic to dogs.
I wanna bring my miniature horse.
That was nice.
We have not encountered that request, but We're ready if you do.
Why do we have
So for the
miniature
next
horses?
board meeting, please bring your miniature horse with you,
After you've asked.
after we've asked.
And submitted those back.
It's submitted those back.
After you get vaccinated, right?
That's right.
All right. Any questions or concerns about moving this forward? It would be moved forward for a second reading before we would. With any of these board policies, what we do is we have two public readings of it before it actually becomes adopted policy. So this would be the first of the two. Hearing none?
It says that they have to be trained, but you're not allowed to ask for proof of their training.
So it ends up being more of a after the fact, hey, it's pretty clear this is not trained.
That's what happens on planes. Yeah, but then it's too late because they've already landed. Yeah.
For the miniature horse on the plane? Oh, cool. All right.
Lizard.
That brings us to the end of the work session. Thank you very much for your time and great questions and your attention on the budget information. Thank you.
Thanks for all the hard work on it.